Hello, I'm Pastor Steve Sebring of Lansing Avenue Baptist Church of Jackson, Michigan. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out our midweek devotional for this week, where we will continue looking at the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23. Now, earlier in the chapter, verse 16, we see that we can either walk in the Spirit, being driven by, motivated by, submitting to the Spirit, or we can walk in the flesh. Both of these will produce certain things in our lives. We see that walking in the flesh produces quite a list of sin in this chapter. But we see in verses 22 and 23 that walking in the Spirit produces, as we see, love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self control. These wonderful attributes of our God can be seen in our lives when we submit to the Spirit, learn the scriptures from the Spirit, and then with the Spirit's help, apply those scriptures to our lives. And for this week, we're going to look at gentleness. This is one that's often translated as meekness. It's a strength under control. It's a humility. It's a not being puffed up by thinking too much of one's own self. And we see this show up in our relationship with the Lord, that we're to come to Him with this sort of meekness, not asserting ourselves, but coming to Him humbly in need of Him. We see this in our relationship with others, that we're not to be asserting ourselves over others, but instead coming to others in humility. Having strength, having ability, having thought, having all of these things our own, but all of these things being under control of the Spirit. Coming with a gentleness, a kindness, a patience, all these things coming from a heart that is meek and gentle before the Lord and before others. Certainly, there are times needed of boldness, of courage, of directness, but none of these get rid of the necessity of gentleness and of meekness before the Lord. That as we do things that require courage and strength, that courage and strength is in control of our God, guided by His Word. And so we're to be meek and gentle in all areas of life, in our relationship with the Lord, in our relationships with others. We see this show up in other places in the Scriptures. One example, Colossians 3, verses 12 and 13. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 3. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you are called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. In both of these, you see that we have this meekness, this gentleness that ought to be in our relationships with others. And it's taught to us by our God. That in our relationships, in endeavoring to keep the unity of one another together, we're not to assert ourselves over others, but to come in gentleness, humility of heart. Again, there will be times when truth needs to be spoken and things need to be bold or we need to be courageous, but in that we are still under control, walking in the Spirit. And in our relationship with others, we ought to be seeking unity and truth rather than asserting ourselves to get our own will. We even learn from Christ as He prayed in the garden that the Father's will would be done, even though it would be hard for Him. This is the attitude we're to have with our God, that His will would be done. And the attitude we're to have as we come to others, that we are not seeking our own will, we're not seeking to be dominant over others, but instead we are coming to serve our God within the family, within the church, within the workplace, within the neighborhood. We're gentle, we're meek, we're strength under control because we are serving our God. And so let us walk in the Spirit and let that show up in our gentleness.